Capitol rioter who was pardoned last week by President Donald Trump has ended up right back in prison. Emily Hernandez, Missouri, gained some fame on the right for holding up the broken sign bearing then House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's name during the January 6th Capitol riots. Now, she ended up turning herself in to federal authorities in 2022 for being identified as one of the rioters, but was sentenced to about 30 days in jail, okay? So she wasn't involved in any of the violence, right? But was there at a place where she wasn't supposed to be, okay? Now, Hernandez was among 1,500 rioters pardoned by Trump last week. So, wait, how did she end up back in prison then? She served her time, right? Well, turns out that 6 days before Hernandez was scheduled to plead guilty to the misdemeanor charge of entering and remaining in a restricted building, she was involved in a fatal car accident. Hernandez had gotten drunk and was driving the wrong way in the eastbound lanes of Interstate 44 when she crashed into an SUV, which claimed the life of 32-year-old Victoria Wilson. Her husband, Ryan, was seriously injured in the crash, could no longer walk without a cane. So serious damage, right? So now Hernandez had a blood alcohol content of about 0.20 after the crash, which is more than twice the legal limit. A Franklin County judge sentenced Hernandez to 10 years for Victoria Wilson's death and 7 years for Ryan Wilson's injury. Judge Ryan Helfrich said, probation is not appropriate given the nature of what happened. Now, during her sentencing, she had said, what I did was ungodly, and I will live with that shame for the rest of my life. I'm sorry for what I did, and if I could take it all back, I would. Okay, so here we go. Another Capitol rioter ending up back in prison for things that she did. In this case, it was afterwards, okay? But here's the thing about her. Anybody could make this mistake, right? Drinking and driving is a serious problem, right? And alcoholism is a problem. And it could affect anyone. Now, I don't know if she had been drinking on January 6th or not. Could explain some things. But nonetheless, all right. Overall, her legal problems, though, are not as bad as some of the other Capitol rioters who are headed back to prison that I have talked about. Now, as I mentioned, she didn't get any involved in any violence on that day, but some of the others who were pardoned did. For example, I've got a few. Matthew Huddle. But look, before I get to that, I do got to note that while many did not have a criminal record prior to January 6th, there were some that did. NPR has identified dozens of defendants with prior convictions or pending charges for crimes including rape, sexual abuse of a minor, domestic violence, manslaughter, production of child sexual abuse material, and drug trafficking. So I mentioned Matthew Huddle, right? Matthew Huddle was shot and killed by a law enforcement officer. Huddle has an extensive criminal history that demonstrates a pattern and practice of disrespecting and disobeying the rule of law, which is consistent with his actions on January 6th, prosecutors had argued. Huddle apparently had his own issues with alcoholism. Huddle's defense attorney attributed his criminal record to a history of extreme alcohol abuse. Okay, so that said, there are others that didn't have anything to do with alcohol, like, for example, Theodore Middendorf, who was accused by Illinois prosecutors of predatory criminal sexual assault of a child. Oh boy. Prosecutors said in a court filing obtained by NPR that Middendorf committed an act of sexual penetration to a victim that was, at the time, 7 years old, according to Indiana state records. Middendorf pleaded guilty to destruction of government property for striking a window at the U.S. Capitol with a flagpole on January 6th. He had not yet been sentenced for his role in the Capitol riot when the Justice Department moved to dismiss his case following Trump's order. So, yeah. Boy, we found the predators. And not a drag queen, okay? Peter Schwartz, had a jaw-dropping criminal history of 38 prior convictions going back to 1991 when he assaulted police officers with pepper spray on January 6, according to federal prosecutors. Some of those convictions, by the way, involved domestic violence. So, wife beating, basically. Now, that guy, of course, is free thanks to Donald Trump and his pardons. Okay. David Daniel, Mint Hill, North Carolina, he pleaded guilty to a charge of assaulting police officers on January 6, but had not yet been sentenced. And, of course, thanks to Trump, he won't be. He is, however, facing charges of production of child pornography and possession of child pornography, which allegedly involves a prepubescent minor and a child under 12 years old. And your take of Texas also pleaded guilty to assaulting police officers with bear spray and a metal whip on January 6th and was sentenced to 6 years in prison. He was pardoned. He is now currently on the loose, according to the Harris County District Attorney in Texas. Take is wanted on 2016 charges of soliciting a minor online. Quote, this is a District Attorney Sean Tair. We are already in the process of tracking Take down. What did he do? He allegedly sent sexually explicit messages to someone he believed was a 15-year-old girl, but was in fact an undercover cop. This was part of his January 6th case. I mean, that's how they got these messages when they were investigating him for January 6th. They got his electronic devices, which showed these messages. Now, there was another, Casey Hopkins. He was convicted of rape in 2002, which resulted in a 7-year prison sentence, according to prosecutors' sentencing memorandum for his January 6th case. Edward Richmond Jr. literally murdered an innocent person while serving in Iraq. He shot a handcuffed Iraqi cowherder in the head. His rap sheet includes resisting arrest, driving under the influence, and domestic abuse. On January 6th, he had assaulted police officers with a baton while wearing tactical gear. So, why am I going through these cases? Well, these are the people who are violent criminals, who do not belong on our streets. Okay? Why did Donald Trump release violent criminals and rapists back into our communities? That should be the question on everyone's lips. Okay? Well, I have the answer. They served him once. And perhaps they will serve him again. That is unless they end up back in prison on these other crimes. Okay? Now, I'm not saying that every person involved in January 6th is like the rest of these people, right? Or that everyone who received a pardon is a bad person. No. Of course, you had former rioter, people like her, Patricia Hemphill. Okay? Here's what she said before the pardons went out. I don't want it. I did wrong. I did a crime. I did bad things, and I paid for my actions. That I have a lot of respect for that. Absolutely. But what we're talking about, again, is the worst of the worst. Being let out of prison, the rapists, the criminals, the violent people. Does anyone else see that it's a problem? I mean, people with massive rap sheets that are a danger to the public, to the people's safety. And Trump will release them. And not only did he release them, but he called them patriots. That's a slap in the face. Okay? Absolute slap in the face. But, as I've said before, what do you expect from a fellow criminal? And maybe perhaps by releasing them, he believes that when it's time for me to try to take more power, I can count on these people because they did my bidding once and maybe they'll do it again. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, subscribe, hit the bell icon in order to get notified whenever a new video is released. And if you want to support independent, progressive media through this difficult time where it seems like everybody is shutting down, become a member on our YouTube page, you become a subscriber on Facebook, or you can go to my Patreon. It's patreon.com/Jeff Waldorf. Thank you.